Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Kelly Driscoll. In this episode, you'll hear part one of my conversation with Amy Urbanus, assistant professor in the Dietetics and Nutrition Program at University of Alaska Anchorage's School of Preventative and Therapeutic Services. More links and information about today's conversation can be found on Digication's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Full episodes of Digication Scholars Conversations can be found on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Kelly Driscoll, and today I am so pleased to introduce Amy Urbanus, assistant professor in the Dietetics and Nutrition Program at University of Alaska Anchorage's School of Preventative and Therapeutic Services. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, Amy, I always kind of like to ask how people came to the institutions where they're teaching today. And I think especially with University of Alaska Anchorage, that there's probably a story there. So could you tell us about your journey?
How
you came to where you are today?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I was not born and raised in Alaska. So I am originally from Des Moines, Iowa. So I am a Midwestern baby and got my undergraduate degree in Colorado at Colorado State University a long time ago. I won't tell you when. And I love the mountains. I kept sort of moving west. After graduation with my undergraduate degree, I decided I did not want to be a dietitian, which is kind of comical that here I am teaching future dietitians. But I moved back to the Midwest. I always say I gave it the good, honest Midwest try, and lived there and worked with a registered dietitian for a year in a employee wellness program. So for your viewers who know the Midwest, I did employee wellness for Hy-Vee grocery stores, which covers a 7-state range in the Midwest. And it was then that I realized this lady's got it going on. Like she's running this program. She's doing all these amazing things. Maybe being a registered dietitian would not be so bad. So I kept working for her, and this is employee wellness kind of when it was on like the forefront of employee wellness. Like this wasn't happening yet because it was in the 90s.
Right.
And
this entirely was not talked about.
Not so much. It was very kind of, so the fact that we were counseling employees at these grocery stores was a pretty cool thing, actually. Anyway, but I was still plugging along in Iowa, and my roommate from Colorado State grew up in Kodiak, Alaska, and she had since moved back to Anchorage and told me I would love it. And so I packed up my little Subaru and drove, 5 or 6 days up the Alcan and came to Alaska. And my first job, I actually interviewed on the road somewhere in the Yukon. I worked for Rural CAP, which is Rural Alaska Community Action Program. And so I worked for their early Head Start and Head Start programs. And within 3 weeks, I was on this little bush plane with duct tape, kind of scary, but I was flying out into these rural communities in Western Alaska. Totally had, all of my prior teachings of what I was supposed to do were just wiped out. I was just totally fell in love with Alaska and the Alaska Native population and worked out there. And then I decided, hey, I really should do my dietetic internship, get my graduate certificate, and move on to becoming a registered dietitian. So the University of Alaska Anchorage had a dietetic internship program. So I did my internship here. I was one of 5 students that year. We did not have an undergraduate didactic program in dietetics at that time, just the internship component. And so I, became a registered dietitian, got a job, met a guy, and, swore I was looking for jobs back in Colorado. But I always say, 3 kids later and a house and some chickens and dogs and all the rest of it, I'm still in Alaska. So this is way more story than you probably want.
I love it.
So I then spent I think I spent 18 years. Mostly, I did work at the Alaska Native Hospital a little bit with South Central Foundation there, but quickly moved over to Providence, Alaska Medical Center and did about 8 years or 10 years in outpatient counseling, primarily focused in diabetes education and outpatient nutrition counseling. And then moved into the acute care side, and for 8 years was a diabetes specialist, working with glycemia management and diabetes care and for patients admitted to the hospital. And the director of the undergraduate program at the time, I'd known her here at UAA, I'd known her for a very long time, kept asking me, like, when are you going to come teach with us? When are you going to come teach with us? I'd been an adjunct instructor for a lot of years, and I love teaching. And so I took a leap and left my dream job. I always say my diabetes specialist job was my dream job, and left that and came to UAA 5 years ago. So this is my 6th year as full-time faculty here at the university. And yeah, it's been a wild ride and great and super fun to dive into a whole, I felt like I was young enough that I had another career left in me. So that's how I'm here.
That's such a great story. And it sounds like you're somebody who's quite comfortable taking leaps. So you mentioned that I think it was your past roommate that was from Kodiak and thought that you would love it in Alaska, and you packed up your Subaru, I think you said. I used to have one of those too.
Yeah.
Fun car. So had you been to Alaska before you packed up and
No.
made your way over? So do you remember some of your first impressions when you arrived?
Yes. So for any of your viewers that have ever driven the Alcan, it's beautiful. And I came up in the end of August. So in the Yukon Territory in the interior, it was fall. So the first thing really is just you're out in the middle of nowhere, or it felt for me at the time that I was out in the middle of nowhere, and just all of these fall colors, and it was super, super gorgeous. Coming into Anchorage, actually, when you actually drive through a town called Palmer, which is one of our more of our agriculture type communities here, which is amazing, and still some of my favorite views of these mountains that you view when you drive in. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. And then I quickly hit what we would consider to not be the greatest part of Anchorage. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is Anchorage. And I was petrified. I had a total panic attack, as I'm driving by, like, strip clubs. I'm just like, oh my gosh, what did I do? And Anchorage is it's a Western city. It's very mixed, and it's not a huge city. And so that was one of my initial reactions. Obviously, there's a lot of beautiful parts of Anchorage. The other thing that really got me is when you watch the news, at least when you used to watch local TV before streaming. So I remember watching the news. I'm in this hotel room. I haven't moved into an apartment yet. I just got here. And when they do the weather up here, they do the lower 48. So they'll talk about everything that's going on, in the lower 48. And then they take the globe and they rotate it. So you come up, and here at home. And I burst into tears because I was like, I'm so far away from home. That's when it actually hit me. Not the drive, not the week-long drive, but oh my heavens.
They had to
rotate the earth. To show Alaska. So that was one of my other biggest, kind of, oh my gosh. But, obviously I'm still here in 2023. So things worked out okay.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And it is remarkable. I've had the incredible opportunity to visit Anchorage. Definitely need to give a shout out to Paul Wasco, the ePortfolio coordinator at University of Alaska Anchorage, because he has just been such a wonderful connector between Jeff Yan, Digication's co-founder and CEO, and myself with the UAA community there. And we had this incredible opportunity to, now visit the campus several times. And it was so striking to me how Anchorage is, very much a city, how quickly you can really feel completely remote and fully immersed in different kinds of experiences, whether you're seeing glaciers or, we joke about moose spotting. Before you've seen one, you really don't know how big they really are.
They're very big.
Yeah. And I remember on one of our early visits, it was springtime there, and seeing, different flowers that were growing there that I'd never seen in the lower 48. Yeah, I've lived in New England and the Southeast and in the, more like Northern California area. And it was just really so fun to see all of the different variety of plants and animals and scenery there. And of course, just this constant view of the mountains. So as someone that loved the mountains, that probably even when you had that moment where you felt had to rotate, right, to be able to see the weather, I hope also is kind of offering you a little bit of feeling of, connection. So thank you so much for sharing that. And you were also mentioning another leap that you made where, you described that you'd found your dream job, but then did make this transition into teaching in higher ed. And was it the kind of community that you had started to connect with at UAA that you think kind of solidified that decision, or were there elements about some of your, prior teaching practice that kind of led you in that direction? What do you feel like might have been that kind of push?
I think it was kind of a lot of different things. I think, so I'm a little bit of even though I've lived in Alaska for a long time, I always kind of describe myself as a little bit of a change junkie. Like I'm kind of always like, what's next? What's the next challenge? What's going to be the next, I remember after I had my third child, I'm like, okay, got married, had baby 1, 2, 3, now what? I had that feeling okay, let's go to PA school, or something, whatever I was doing at the time. And so, I'd been in that position for 8 years. And I think the thing that always I found myself in that role teaching a lot. So one of my so I did patient education. So I did diabetes education for patients, which it seems to a lot of people, they're like, oh, don't you get tired of diabetes? And I'm like, no, because my role here is really to be an investigator and a problem solver and figure out.
It's so different for
why. Yeah. So every person is so different. No two people are the same. I always call diabetes a designer disease. It's very personalized. And so I had built this rapport with the physicians and nursing staff and pharmacy, and, kind of was really felt like an integral member of an interdisciplinary team where I would interview my patients and really try to figure out, what is it that got you here? And so let's figure out the barriers, and let's figure out how it is that you have found yourself in the hospital, and then, see if I can't help coordinate that care and transition you to the outpatient world and all of that. So the interdisciplinary aspect was really important to me. And another big part of my role was to build a glycemia management program within the hospital, and kind of lead that charge. And what that really means is getting physicians, nurses, techs, pharmacists, to all understand each other and speak the same language. And I love that. I mean, pharmacists are different, totally different than nurses. Like nurses, I mean, they have to like think on the fly, and then pharmacy would be all upset because they're very, not all pharmacists, but some are like very linear and like, well, but why would they do that? They can't do that. And I'm like, well, they did that because of this, and then the physicians are doing something different. And so I found myself doing a lot of presentations and education, and I would let physicians or different people follow with me and, round with me. And we were, I had the advantage of really hyper focusing on one condition. So I felt like I could get really good at that. Where other providers and things don't have that advantage, right? They have to be experts in so many different things. So I found myself educating a lot. And so not just patient education, but then also professional education. So I think I liked that. I found that really awesome and interesting and rewarding, I guess. And so when this became available, this position at UAA, it kind of married those things for me. So it's obviously higher education. So I'm teaching students, at a higher, obviously like at a higher level. I'm totally fortunate to be able to teach in the undergraduate and the graduate program. So it really, I have a lot of variety in my student population. I am in charge of advising. I knew I was going to be in charge of advising for our program. And I've been told I spend way too long with my students. I remember my coworker whose office is next to me, she came after I'd had like my fifth advising session in my first year. She comes around, she's like, "You're not going to spend an hour with each person, are you?" She's like, "You're never going to get anything done." And I was like, "Oh."
But Amy.
I was like, I was like, okay, well, I like this. Like it felt like counseling. So it utilized my counseling skills to where, so when we talk about, I know we'll talk about portfolios, but when we talk about student success and all of that kind of stuff, like that felt like good to me. So I really enjoy the advising aspect of things. And then it was just, it was like, why not? Like I said, I felt like I had another, I kind of had like my first 20 years. It was like, okay, well, am I going to do this for the next 20 or 15 or however long I end up working? I don't know. Or is there's something I felt like I had enough time to be good at something else, I guess, like develop and grow professionally. I will tell people that first year that I worked full time as faculty, I hadn't worked that hard in a long time. So just everything, was just so brand new, a whole different system and everything. This past summer, though, was super happy. I took a position as a PRN, per diem clinical dietitian back at the same hospital. And to kind of make sure my skills were, current and accurate. And I had so much fun. I really do miss there is a culture in a hospital, and it's a very social environment. And so, there are elements to that I definitely miss, but this has been good.
Yeah. Well, and what an incredible kind of experience, and in all of those different areas for you to be able to bring to your students now too, even the element of things about that you miss, because you're able to kind of pull from that when you're communicating with your students and advocating for them and helping guide them through the advising, how lucky those students are to have somebody that committed to the field and also to their success. Now, I know one of your recent challenges as someone who said that they, are always kind of looking to do new things, was the recent kind of accreditation within dietetics.
And could you share with us a little bit what that was like, and maybe at a high level how Digication may have supported some of those efforts?
Oh, for sure. So a part of my role here as assistant professor is I also this other faculty member that recruited me. I didn't know that she was moving up the ladder. So she's a very good friend of mine, but she was the director of our didactic program in dietetics, which is our Bachelor of Science degree in dietetics. And so in my second semester of teaching, I became the director of our program, which means that that in addition to those other things, I'm really in charge of outside accreditation. So we are accredited by an organization called ACEND. I couldn't tell you what it stands for. Accreditation Council for Dietetics Education. I don't know. Anyway, that's so terrible. I should have it written down here somewhere.
No, we all have to try to memorize so many different acronyms.
Yeah, they are our accrediting body and our larger body. So they accredit our program. So we're accredited as a didactic program in dietetics, which essentially is just the undergraduate portion. When a student completes that, they're eligible. They receive what we call a verification statement in addition to their degree, and it allows them to move into graduate education, another accredited program where they do supervised practice or those internship hours that a lot of programs have, and then are able to sit for the registered dietitian nutritionist exam. So we are accredited for 7 years, or were accredited for 7 years. Now we are again, which is great. And so I sort of found myself in year 4 needing to start the process of writing a self-study and proving to our accrediting body that we should be reaccredited. And wow, what a process. I learned a lot about the university as a whole. And so we, you, like many of your viewers, they have programs that you write these gigantic reports. And then we had last fall, so in the fall of 2022, we had some site reviewers, external reviewers come up to Alaska and do a site review. And so a part of that site visit is, they want tons and tons and tons of evidence that you're doing what you say you're doing. So you write this big report and they're like, yeah, that's great. Okay, now we want to see, the proof that you're actually doing this. So in what I was told, as far as, I talked to lots of different people who had gone through these site visits in other professions, like our dental program had just gone through a site visit, to other ACEND accredited programs in the lower 48. What's the best way to do this? I interviewed our actual site reviewers to say, hey, like, how do you want all of these documents? I mean, it's like, I felt like it was just so overwhelming, the amount of information that they wanted to have on site. And they said, well, some people will do a Blackboard shell, like create like a dev shell, like and just plug things in there. And then you give us access to Blackboard. Otherwise, they found it to be really successful to do like a Google Drive and then just have all of your folders and, organized. And I was just like, that sounds awful. Like, as a reviewer, like how you could open up each of those documents. I mean, I felt like you would want to have like 4 screens so you could, and that tells
panel.
that tells you I probably should not be a reviewer. But it just seemed very, like 2-dimensional, I guess, maybe, if that's a good word to use. So, I was like, well, how would you, like, you would close something and then you would open another document and, and in the older days, you had portfolios, you had binders.
Right.
So because we use ePortfolio in our program, for our students to show competence and to have the fact that they've met all of these competencies as a part of our accredited program, I asked if they would be willing to let me use an ePortfolio to house and to showcase all of our on-site evidence and documents for them. They said, I have no idea what you're talking about, but that sounds great. I mean, they sort of knew. I think, there are other, kinds of things that they had maybe, dabbled with in their own programs. So I reached out to Paul Waskow, and he was wonderful in helping me do this. And I essentially just built a gigantic portfolio, which, to have, so it was super organized under all of, we have, I think, 8 different standards. And underneath all of those standards, there are specific, student examples of work and all of that kind of stuff that had to be as a part of those on-site, documents that needed to be ready. And Paul was super gracious to work with the reviewers to make sure that they had access and knew how to do it. We knew it was going to be FERPA compliant. There were, some things like that. It was great because I knew it was locked down, so it didn't have to it wasn't public facing. They knew that they just had access to it. And one of the beautiful things was that they didn't have to be present and in our, in our drive, right. So I guess a Google Drive, I could, give them access to that ahead of time. But the feedback that I got from our reviewers was really this was so great. We were able to, we sat at the hotel and we could just look at stuff and listen to things and, all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, it worked out really swimmingly. And all of the things, one of the nice things for me, because I use Portfolio in my classes, is that it forced me to kind of become, like a super user. So, because I was uploading all different types of files. So we run an online program. So it was a wonderful way for me to upload videos that students had developed and created. I could share, audio recordings that they had done. I could share, a lot of different types of media, as far as what I thought in an online program, really highlights, what we're doing here and the quality of online education that we're providing for our students. But it did, so I always have my students build these portfolios. So it was really good for me. It was very humbling to be okay, I'm going to build something from scratch and kind of do that. So it worked out really well.
Oh, wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that. And I would love to hear a little bit about how, you were able to craft this incredible kind of presentation of your program. How are you using these kinds of tools with the students in your courses? Because I think dietetics has had a pretty long history with Digication. I believe it may have started in 2014 because it was one of the first programs, I think, to jump on board because of this real need to be able to record what the students were doing and see their growth towards particular standards that they were working towards.
Yeah, my predecessor, Dr. Sticka. So she's the one who recruited me, moved out. But she's the one that really brought, she was on board with Portfolio. And so I inherited her courses that she had so I came in 2018. So she had really just started kind of building that in our curriculum. And even to this day, I was actually kind of surprised because this is what I came into. So I just sort of made the assumption that this is what programs do. This is the kind of stuff that they use because it made a lot of sense to me. I think prior to when I was going through this site visit self-study stuff, we also had to adopt 2022 standards. So within the ACEND community of directors, we had lots of meetings kind of going through, with, just like Zoom meetings, whatever, going through the different standards, what had changed, all of that kind of stuff. And one of the major things that had changed was that now our ACEND, our accrediting body, is really requiring us to better document achievement of competence. So, have your students actually met the competency, and how do you show that? And so I was like, oh, we use this ePortfolio in our program and all of our students build an ePortfolio. And I was blown away by how many people were like, you do what? And so it was actually really, really helpful. And I hope, and I think there are some other programs and program directors that are starting to think about how, other than just saying, yes, check, I did an assignment. Yes, check, I got a C or better. Check, that kind of stuff, that there's a way that you can actually have students demonstrate their level of competence. So what we do throughout our program is in our DN 100, it's a 100 level. It's called the Profession of Dietetics. It's a 1-credit class. It's for our pre-majors. I teach that class, and they learn how to build a portfolio, an ePortfolio. And we have a template that we use. Obviously, we're big on templates. Having everybody start something from scratch is not a good idea. And so students really get the opportunity to use our dietetic templates. I tell my students it's really like the bucket. It's the main bucket. Mm-hmm. And they learn how to use it, for one, so they're not intimidated when they are taking some 400, 300 level class. And now not only do they have to do this big project that can be intimidating, but they have to do it in ePortfolio. So I like to use that 100 level entry point as, hey, this is the purpose. Over the course of the program, you're going to be doing all these different assignments. You're going to, we utilize specific projects and assignments to measure, a competency in our program. And they use the portfolio to demonstrate that. And so they'll, they do a personal statement. They learn how to do this, the pretty stuff if they want. And then start kind of are a little introduced into using reflection as a tool of, making sure, like, do I really know what that means? What does that mean to me? Like, what does that mean to somebody else? What does that mean for my profession? And so we introduce it there. And then throughout the program, they can kind of slowly work on it. But the primary hub is I teach a senior seminar in dietetics. It's a year-long course in their senior year. And it's at that point that we really dive deep into all the competencies. We have group discussions and such. My students do a self-assessment. They go through and rank themselves and whether or not they feel like they've already met a specific competency. Usually there's 4 or 5 that they say they still need some work. They identify outside opportunities, webinars, working with another organization, some other way that they work with me on figuring out how they can better meet a competency. And then we have a 1 page for each, designated to each competency in their ePortfolio, where they upload any evidence that they might have that shows that they've met that competency, whether that's a project or assignment. Sometimes it's pictures of them volunteering somewhere, whatever it may be. They write a description as far as like what that all, what their evidence entails. But then the bigger piece is that they have to write a reflection on why they feel like they've met that competency. So we have, I think there are 26 or 30 competencies. So it takes a while. And, they kind of take that whole year. And I use the portfolio as my means of not awarding a bachelor's degree, but of awarding that verification statement from our accreditor that says, yes, you can move on into supervised practice. I've had students that then go on to utilize their portfolio. They might tweak it a little bit, and they've used it to apply to graduate school internships if they're out of Alaska. So we try to, I don't want to say sell it, but, try to say like, hey, this isn't just, it's just not a program assignment. Maybe you never look at it again. Who knows? But you can utilize it after. So for us here at UAA, it is very much kind of the, it's a thread throughout our entire program, which is why it felt so normal, I guess, for us to utilize it to demonstrate that our program has met the accreditation competencies that we have, or standards that we had to meet.
Here's a preview of what's coming up next in part 2 of my conversation with Amy Urbanus, Assistant Professor in the Dietetics and Nutrition Program at University of Alaska Anchorage.
I always try to tell students that you really can utilize, portions of or all of or whatever. You can utilize portfolio in providing, and sharing your depth and breadth of experience, even though in a resume it may not jump out at at somebody who's looking to hire somebody. In a resume it may not jump out as you look at their work experience, you're like, oh, okay, well, you're pretty green, it's there's not a whole lot. But in an ePortfolio, they might have done some amazing project that gives them an example of what they're capable of, and how they might fit within their organizations.